On release, Neuvillette was hailed as the best damage dealer in Genshin, having all the traits to make him one of the most complete DPS characters in the game, and just being a cut above everyone we had before. But now, with the release of Escoffier and soon to be Ineffa, as well as the rampant damage increases other DPS units have received in Natlin, I think the meta has shifted away from Neuvillette as a hypercarry, and he's more suited towards being played and focused on in a new role. Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be talking about Neuvillette and going over why I think his role in the meta is shifting, as well as how I think he's going to stay relevant in Nordcry without his best teammates and roles in teams is changing. So we're going to discuss why Neuvillette was such a good DPS in the first place, go over all the buffs he's received in 5.x, and close out the video by talking about his new role as well as the calculations I have for him. But before we do that, as always, if at any point during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding against the meta and to keep you updated. Shout out to all my lovely channel members, your support means the world to me. And also, so right now Movuika and Emily are currently on the banner, so if you'd like to cut down on the costs while going for them, then I would like to announce the sponsor for today's video, LD Shop. LD Shop is a very safe and reliable top-up site that allows you to get Primo Gems at a great deal starting from 15% off, while keeping your data safe. As for transactions, you only need to type in your UID and region, as you can see me doing here. Just needed to quickly refresh my welkin, and as you can see it's here. And make sure to use my link, as that way you'll receive an extra 15% off coupon, as well as a 5% off coupon which can save you up to $50. LD Shop goes through official channels as well, meaning that you won't lose any of the in-game benefits like first time top-up bonuses, so no need to worry. And additionally, because LD Shop is so great, users who spend over $80 will receive a VIP membership which rewards you with free welcome moons. So head over to ldshop.gg using my link in the description below. What are you waiting for? Thanks to LD Shop for sponsoring this video, now back to it. So I guess let's start by documenting why Neuvillette was the best DPS in the game in the first place, which mostly comes down to two factors, being his damage and quality of life. At the very least, after Farina released, Neuvillette's best team was him alongside his Archon, Kazuha, and then you could pretty much just bullshit whoever you wanted from there. It really didn't matter that much. But Archaic Petra Zhongli was the most preferred, that or Baizu. And Baizu is only because people really wanted him to be good. Anyways, in the Abyss, Neuvillette just did the most damage, competing with even other very single target oriented carries for boss killing, and we can get into his biggest strength, which is his AoE. Neuvillette shoots a beam that fires in a straight line with good coverage that you could very easily reposition Neuvillette himself and aim the beam, giving him the best AoE clears next to like Nilo at the time. Hell, people even played both of them together sometimes. Another thing Neuvillette had going for him was also just that he's very easy to play, and his rotations are extremely flexible. Neuvillette's main source of damage are his charge attacks, which does have a lot of ramp up time, but the source war droplets he makes from his skill and burst make it come out instantly, and his charge attacks are like 90% of his damage contribution, which besides the animation cancel you can do pretty easily, doesn't demand much from the player at all. You just use your skill and burst and spam charge attacks. Most damage dealers had quite a drastic difference in playing them optimally and not, but for Neuvillette it really didn't matter at all. His optimal playstyle is just given to you, on top of the fact that unlike other characters, his damage wasn't burst reliant or tied to his special stance, so you could just fort out these charge attacks as long as his burst or skill cooldown was up, which was nice for finishing off mobs. Some more glazing, but Neuvillette also self-heals with every charge attack, so there was no need to bring healers on his teams, and if you did, it would just give him an extra layer of survivability. He also scales with HP, and therefore even though Farina drains his HP, his current health while being drained was still more than most attack scaling carries at max health, and unlike a majority of the roster at the time, he was also a rare carry that didn't depend on Bennett for his best performance. And did I mention that as long as he had Farina, you could slap together pretty much any ragtag combination of supports and get great performance from him. So TLDR, Neuvillette was held in high regard because he did some of the best single target damage in the game, was the best AoE character at the time when the Abyss was more AoE centric, wasn't tied to Bennett who was the most contested character in the game at the time, had a high HP pool on top of self-healing making him extremely tanky and easy to pilot, and he was just extremely easy to play overall. The only real issues with Neuvillette at the time was his interruption resistance, but that wasn't that big of a deal as his best teammate in the end was Zhongli, who's a shielder. You could also fix this by getting his Constellation 1, and also because of Neuvillette's AoE you weren't even in melee range that often, so if you play well this could be avoided. That's actually another thing that's both a negative and positive. Neuvillette started the trend of characters having just absurd weapons much better than anything else, with his Constellation 1 also being one of the best in the game even now, so if you pulled either of those things it drastically increased his performance. Like this is kind of still an issue now. If you don't have Neuvillette's signature and you're free to play, you basically have no options. Prototype Amber is so far behind his signature it's not even funny. And another semi-restriction people try to downplay is Neuvillette's reliance on Farina. Neuvillette Neuvillette with and without Furina is also a very different character in my opinion. Neuvillette's optimal rotation requires him to do 4 charge attacks, which does require the use of his burst. You're going to struggle to get that without Furina being able to battery Neuvillette his whole field time. Furina also provides insanely strong buffing to Neuvillette, and Neuvillette also at the same time enables Furina to do a lot of damage in his teams. At the very least, though, for most of Genshin's lifecycle, Neuvillette was the best pairing with Furina anyways, so you weren't really hurting your account by playing them together. Just something to note. Anyways, Neuvillette was good for all those reasons, and moving further into Fontaine, his position as the most highly regarded DPS didn't really change at all. Some teams and characters did theoretically at least surpass Neuvillette in single target, like some Arlecchino teams, a lot of Zhonyan plunge vape setups, and some double Hydra teams. But again, content was still very AoE centric, which no one could handle better than Neuvillette. And Neuvillette was still by leaps and bounds the most comfortable character to pilot, so it didn't really matter anyways for the discussion. So well, what happened to Neuvillette, and why am I saying he's no longer best as a DPS? Well, it's time to take a little look at Natlin. Before talking about why I think Neuvillette kind of fell off as the main DPS, he did actually receive some pretty notable buffs to his teams. Well, I say notable, but the first was Kachina, and even though she was just made to hold the scroll set is one of the best amps you can give to Neuvillette, and there really wasn't that many ways to amplify Neuvillette's damage as he's HP scaling. Most of the supportive sets in the game just buffed attack, so Kachina was kind of just a comfortable side grid to all his current teams in the top tier. The next and arguably the biggest spike in Neuvillette's damage came from the introduction of Xilonen, who was essentially just a second Kazuha with similar buffing. Neuvillette's most popular final slot in teams was Zhongli, as I said before, and in terms of amplifying, Xilonen was a healer, so she was able to generate more fanfare for Furina, and she also just buffed a lot more than Petra Zhongli did, with much better uptime too, completing the Celestia Killer Neuvillette team as people dubbed it. Oh yeah, I also forgot to mention Auroron exists, who is also a decent scroll set holder with solid personal damage. And then there's my glorious, exquisite, perfect, magnificent Sitlali, who is also just a side grid to Xilonen. Now to go into the reasons why Neuvillette as a hypercarry started to fall off, you kind of just got more and more carries able to do more than Neuvillette's level of damage, whether that's literally any of the Natlin casts dominating Neuvillette in single target, while certain ones also just have better AoE as well, on top of buffs from Natlin supports being more impactful on some other characters and boosting their performance by a lot. The next is that Neuvillette's qualities also became less important. With both Stygian Onslaught and the recent Abyss cycles, the hardest checks in the game have now just become single target checks, so Neuvillette's amazing AoE has mattered less, on top of the fact that, as I said before, some of the best single target DPS in the game like Malvuika, Mualani, and Veressa, or also just some of the best AoE damage dealers with great coverage and front-loaded damage, resulting in faster clears than Neuvillette even when the Abyss is more AoE centric. All the recent damage dealers also just get built-in resistance to interruption, which is something Neuvillette doesn't have, whilst the best supports in the game are also just healers or sustain units in general, so Neuvillette's survivability isn't that much of an upside either. The best team in the game currently uses 3 sustain units, without Furina to forcefully drain HP, and Malvuika doesn't take poise damage in her burst form, she just isn't dying. That also leads me to saying that most of the Natlin roster besides like Kinich are pretty easy to play. People find Mualani cringe, but you just run into enemies and press the normal attack button, whilst she's also a character with a high HP pool so you won't die easily on her. Chaska floats above enemies and you just hold down the normal attack button so she very rarely gets hit, while not having that much mechanical depth to her. Malvuika's nuke is already like 70% of her damage alone, and even if you don't do her more advanced combos, just the spin alone makes her still better than pretty much every DPS in the game, besides like Skirk and Veressa. Speaking of Veressa, her combos are also pretty easy to learn whilst she has one of the more forgiving AoEs in the game, and again with Skirk, even though she has a more complex rotations and combos, even doing her most basic ones of just spamming normal attacks puts her far ahead of most other damage dealers, while she also has freeze on her side for content against non-bosses for comfort. So yes, maybe in totality there isn't a character that has all of Neuvillette's traits combined, but most of the modern DPS fill a majority of the quota for quality of life Neuvillette had, whilst there's still a discrepancy in the performance between the characters. And I know I'm probably going to draw heads from this, but even characters like Gigami, Chlorinde, and Arlecchino have fared much better in the current meta, as they just synergize much better with the Natlin supports. Sitlali has done wonders for Gaming and Arlecchino, especially with how much better her vertical investment has gotten, and Chlorinde is able to abuse both Malvuika and Yonton, boosting her performance drastically. So with everything I've laid out, let's talk about how Neuvillette is going to last as a staple in the meta, and that is going to be by him shifting away from the hypercarry or carry role, to now being more of a driver or enabler for strong off-field damage dealers. Also, before I get into explaining, if you've gotten this far into the video and you haven't liked and subscribed, what are you doing? Just do both of us a favor and click the like and subscribe button. Thank you. Now back to the explanation. So in Genshin, being on field doesn't necessarily make you the carry of a team or main DPS. Even as early as 1.0, we had Sucre's taser teams where the off-field damage dealers were making up a majority of the team's damage, where Sucre's just had the best traits to utilize and enable them. And characters that were often seen as DPS becoming enablers or drivers for strong off-field DPS also isn't really new either. On release, people were playing Verdescent Hu Tao teams trying to boost their damage to its max, but with the release of characters like Yelan and Farina, as well as the fact that Hu Tao really struggles getting a Pyro, Viridescent, or Scroll buff without the aid of another Pyro unit, it became better to just build teams around Yelan and Farina's damage with Hu Tao at the center, just being a really good driver for them with the amount of normal attack she does for Yelan, while still doing serviceable damage herself. And that is how Hu Tao has kept pace in the meta currently. The same thing happened with Raiden too, and I would argue was always the case with her, where her best team included lots of strong off-field DPS, whether that's Rational, Double Hydra, or Chevreuse teams. Sometimes the character is just more suited to enabling strong off-field damage dealers, instead of being the main source of damage themselves, and that is fine, and what I currently think is happening to Neuvillette. And if you look at it, Neuvillette does have pretty good traits that allow him to be an enabler slash driver. Also, sorry tangent, but I do just kind of find it funny how there was this one Zajef clip during Neuvillette in pre-release, where he said something like, Neuvillette is not a hypercarry, he's designed around his ability to apply Hydro, and everyone laughed at Zajef for that, including me, but maybe he was onto something, because one of the first things, ironically enough, that makes Neuvillette a good driver is that he's a Hydra unit. Hydra is one of the most flexible elements in the game that has some of the most synergies, and also doesn't really interfere with other reactions that much, allowing you to run multiple for chain reaction teams. Another benefit Neuvillette has is the fact that his rotations are very flexible. Neuvillette just needs to get 4 charge attacks off in a rotation to be played optimally, all of which can be split and happen at different points in a rotation, which means that you can do things like recast all-field units' abilities or supports buffs to get maximum utilization of supports, which not a lot of characters can do. This gives Neuvillette innate synergy with any turret type of character, as they innately scale well with turret uptime, as well as characters that can drop nukes like Skirk or Movika in between Neuvillette's charge attacks. Which I guess something that I didn't cover is that Neuvillette doesn't really have a way of front-loading his damage, unless you play his vape teams, which no one does, so it's not important. I can't wait to get all the essays from the 3 Neuvillette players that swear by vape Neuvillette. But yes, since Neuvillette doesn't have a consistent way of front-loading damage in all of his teams, being able to add Movika or Skirk, which are just delete buttons, are nice. Also, Farina being Neuvillette's best teammate is also great, as she's a damage percent teammate buffer, so anyone that just does talent damage will be able to slow into these teams and get buffed by Farina. Now, Neuvillette currently has 3 main wheelchair teams, the first being with Movika and Sitlali, where the principle behind this is Farina's Hydra application reacting with Sitlali to proc scroll and shred Hydra resistance. Sitlali ideally holds TTDS to enable a melted nuke on Movika, and then with both Neuvillette and Farina's Hydra application as well as Sitlali's Cryo application, Movika will either vape or melt her all-field hits, while Neuvillette benefits from all the buffs these 3 characters provide. This team will be the best in multi-wave scenarios like the current Abyss with 1 wave of ads and then a boss, so Movika can pretty much dispatch all the enemies during Neuvillette's setup, and he still gets buffed a ton in this team. The only issue is that it's kind of a 1 rotation team because this rotation is 24 seconds long, which does slightly disalign with Neuvillette's skill cooldown, and having to extend rotations makes it appear a lot worse on paper, where the other Neuvillette teams don't really run into this issue. The next I want to highlight being Escoffier teams. These teams are a lot simpler in principle: Neuvillette, Farina, Escoffier, and then in your last slot your best options are going to be either Skirk for her nuking or Sitlali for her buffing. Both are pretty good. And lastly, we now have Ineffa, who is in my opinion Neuvillette's perfect teammate. I have made a more in-depth video with Ineffa just to ignore the calculations, they are outdated, but to go over her kit because it's quite simple. She's an electric turret based damage dealer like Yair Official that also creates a shield with her elemental skill, and she replaces the Electrocharge reaction with Lunar Charged, which instead of scaling purely off of elemental mastery of the last character to apply Hydro or Electro like normal EC, will instead take all the units crit and elemental mastery into consideration for their reaction damage. And this reaction as well as all of Ineffa's damage will be dealt in AoE. Now to go back to why I think Ineffa is so good for Neuvillette, one of the main problems I had with the Escoffier team core is the fact that it scales poorly with Neuvillette's investment, as Neuvillette's Constellation 1 is worse via only having 1 Draconic stack at a base, and if you get Escoffier's weapon or constellations it does nothing at all for Neuvillette. And the team's AoE performance was also going to be significantly worse due to how much damage Neuvillette loses, so I just never really liked this team at all. But Ineffa kinda just fixes all of those things and more with Neuvillette. For starters, unless you're assuming like 100% uptime on Cryo Resonance, which I don't think is realistic, Ineffa teams end up just being the highest DPS Neuvillette teams in the game for both AoE and single target content, and that is a huge upside to Ineffa because all of her damage is on an AoE, including the Lunar Charge reaction, so she pretty much has the boss killing potential of Neuvillette's Escoffier teams while still not losing any AoE performance. In fact, it's even better with her, I would argue, because it's coming from multiple sources. Ineffa is also just a shielder solving Neuvillette's interruption resistance issues, and lastly, Ineffa scales amazingly with vertical investment into Neuvillette and herself. Neuvillette C1 gets its full benefits as they're using 3 element teams, and because Lunar Charge is a reaction that scales off of crit, getting Neuvillette's weapon not only boosts his own personal damage but boosts the damage of the Lunar Charge reaction. It's to a point where even if Neuvillette is C1 with his weapon, happen, unlike Escoffier teams which get outscaled, Ineffa teams are still decently ahead over Hypercarry Neuvillette teams in performance, with Ineffa's constellations all being good, so I can confidently say that I think this is just Neuvillette's best team currently. Also, I like this team a lot because it's a team where Kazuha is just kind of better than Shilonen. Crystallize and Electrocharge has always been kind of awkward together. It's where you can't necessarily guarantee a Hydro Crystal, and Kazuha double swirling gives him a decent amount of personal damage that puts him far ahead of Shilonen, allowing her to be run more comfortably in another team. But going back to the main topic, if we continue to get characters like Ineffa or just strong off-field damage dealers in general, with how synergistic Neuvillette has been with them, I think it kind of just cements him as more of an enabler slash driver rather than being a hyper carry in teams. Neuvillette at C0 simply just does not have the damage anymore to really be competitive with the other top tier Natlan carries. So because of how Taylor made his teams are to fit in powerful sub DPS damage dealers, and how these characters like Escoffier and Ineffa are also tied to future boss mechanics, I think if you want to play Neuvillette, your best bet is going to be to try and invest into these type of sub DPS to get the most mileage out of him, and keep him in the top tiers for all types of content. But with that, I don't think I have anything else to say, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Neuvillette, as I love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Channel members, I love you. You guys know this. So with no more to say, I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.